I stood frozen in the doorway of my own studio, my hands trembling so violently that the magazine slipped from my grip and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. The sound echoed through the space that had once been my sanctuary, my creative haven, the place where I had poured every ounce of my soul into building something that was entirely mine. But the woman staring back at me from that glossy cover, standing confidently in my studio, her hand resting possessively on the reclaimed wood desk that I had built with my own hands from my grandmother's barn, was not me. It was Bianca, my sister, and the headline screamed in bold letters, Bianca Davies, the South's rising star in interior design. The room started spinning. I could hear Layla, my assistant, saying something, her voice cutting through the fog of my shock. But the words wouldn't register. All I could see was that photograph, Bianca's smug smile. My vintage chair that I had spent 3 months reupholstering by hand, positioned perfectly in the background. My mood boards pinned to the wall behind her. My sketches scattered artfully across my desk. Everything that represented years of sleepless nights, countless sacrifices, and unwavering dedication was now being claimed by someone who had never created a single original thing in her entire life. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, if you've ever felt the gut-wrenching pain of having your dreams stolen right from under you, then you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel. And drop a comment below telling me about a time when you had to stand up for yourself, because this journey is about to get intense. And I promise you, the ending will leave you speechless. Let me take you back to where it all began. Because to understand the magnitude of what happened, you need to know who I was before that devastating moment in my studio. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a family that looked picture perfect from the outside. My father, Richard Davies, was a respected attorney. My mother, Eleanor Davies, came from old Southern money and spent most of her time organizing charity galas and maintaining her social standing. Then there was Bianca, my older sister, by 3 years, the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. And then there was me, Zoe, the afterthought, the one who was always trying to prove she was worthy of being noticed. From the time I could hold a crayon, I was drawn to creating beautiful spaces. While other kids played outside, I rearranged furniture in my bedroom, mixed colors to paint my walls, and sketched out floor plans for imaginary houses. My grandmother, my father's mother, it was the only one who truly saw my passion. She would take me to antique markets, teach me about different design periods, and tell me stories about how a well-designed space could change someone's entire outlook on life. When she passed away during my sophomore year of college, she left me her barn, a structure filled with beautiful old wood and vintage pieces, with a note that said, "For Zoe, who sees beauty where others see rubble." But in my family, pursuing a creative career was seen as frivolous. My parents wanted me to follow in my father's footsteps, to become a lawyer, or at least marry one. Bianca had taken the safer route, getting a business degree and working a corporate job that she hated, but that impressed our parents' country club friends. Every family dinner became a comparison session, where Bianca's stable paycheck was praised, while my design portfolio was met with polite disinterest or thinly veiled criticism. I remember one particular Thanksgiving when I was 24, just a year out of design school. I had brought photos of my first major project, a complete renovation of a young couple's historic home in Savannah. I was so proud, so excited to finally show my family that I was making it. I had worked 16-hour days for 3 months, often sleeping in my car between meetings because I couldn't afford both gas and a hotel. The project had been featured in a local design blog, and I thought, finally, this would be the moment they would see me. My mother glanced at the photos for maybe 10 seconds before turning to Bianca and asking about her latest quarterly report. My father never even looked up from carving the turkey. But Bianca looked at those photos with an intensity I had never seen before. She asked me question after question about my process, about how I sourced materials, about my client relationships, about my design philosophy. At the time, I thought she was finally showing genuine interest in my work. I was so starved for validation from my family that I didn't recognize the look in her eyes for what it really was: calculation. Over the next few years, I threw myself into building my business. I worked every angle I could think of. I took on projects that barely paid, just to build my portfolio. I spent my weekends at estate sales and salvage yards, finding pieces I could restore and repurpose. I taught myself carpentry, upholstery, even basic electrical work because I couldn't afford to hire help. My student loan payments were crushing me. But I refused to give up. I refused to go crawling back to my parents and admit they were right, that I should have chosen a more practical path. Layla came into my life during this time like a guardian angel I didn't know I needed. She was a design student at the local community college, working 3 jobs to pay her tuition. She walked into my tiny studio apartment that I had optimistically labeled as my office one day. Responding to an ad I had posted for an unpaid intern, I told her up front that I couldn't pay her, that I could barely pay myself, that all I could offer was experience and maybe some college credit. She looked around at my space, at the organized chaos of fabric swatches and paint samples and sketches pinned to every available surface. And she said, "I don't need money right now. I need to learn from someone who actually loves what they do." That was 3 years ago, and she had been with me ever since, eventually becoming my paid assistant when I could finally afford one. My relationship with my family during this time was complicated, to say the least. I tried to maintain a connection because some misguided part of me still hoped they would eventually see my worth. I showed up to family dinners, endured the passive-aggressive comments about my little hobby, and watched as Bianca soaked up all the attention and praise for her boring corporate achievements. She had gotten promoted to some mid-level management position, and you would have thought she had won the Nobel Prize from the way my parents celebrated. But something shifted about a year ago. Bianca started asking me more questions about my work again. She would call me late at night, claiming she was stressed from her job and wanted to hear about something more creative. She would visit my studio, which I had finally been able to move into after landing a few decent-sized projects. She would look at my mood boards, flip through my design journals, and ask to see my client files because she was curious about how the business side worked. She brought wine, ordered takeout, and for the first time in our lives, I felt like we might actually be building a real sister relationship. I was such a fool. I showed her everything. I trusted her with my process, my trade secrets, the relationships I had carefully cultivated with suppliers and artisans. I even let her sit in on client meetings, thinking that maybe exposure to creative work would inspire her to find something she was passionate about. When she asked if she could take photos of my studio for her inspiration board, I didn't think twice about it. When she borrowed my design journals to read before bed, I thought it was sweet. My parents' behavior also changed. They started showing up at my studio unannounced, something they had never done before. They would make comments about how surprisingly professional my space was, how impressive my client list had become. My mother even suggested that I should let her interior decorator friends know about my services. I was so desperate for their approval that I didn't question why this sudden interest had emerged after years of dismissal. 6 months ago, I landed the biggest opportunity of my career. A major developer in New York wanted to hire me to design the lobby and common spaces for a new luxury residential building. The budget was substantial, the timeline was tight, and the exposure would be incredible. I worked myself to the bone preparing the proposal, pulling together every skill and connection I had developed over the years. When I found out I got the project, I cried. I actually called my parents first, before my friends, before Layla, because some part of me still needed them to be proud of me. My mother's response was lukewarm. My father said, "Well, don't let it go to your head." But Bianca seemed genuinely thrilled. She took me out to dinner, bought champagne. I told me she always knew I would make it big. She asked if she could help me prepare for the New York meetings, maybe organize my files or handle some of the administrative work. I was so overwhelmed and so touched by her offer that I said yes. I gave her access to my digital files, my client database, my project archives, everything. The New York project consumed me for the next 5 months. I was traveling back and forth constantly, working with contractors and suppliers, managing a team twice the size of what I was used to. Layla came with me for most of it, and we worked around the clock. The developer loved my vision. The project was running smoothly, and I felt, for the first time in my life, like I had truly made it, like I had proven everyone wrong, like all those years of struggle and sacrifice had been worth it. I should have known better. I should have known that in my family. My success would never be allowed to outshine Bianca's. I should have recognized the signs. During those 5 months, Bianca became my main point of contact back in Charleston. She checked on my studio, forwarded important emails, even handled a few small local clients who needed quick consultations. My parents offered to help too, stopping by the studio to make sure everything was secure. I was grateful. I actually felt like maybe, finally, my family was supporting me. The New York project wrapped up 2 weeks before that awful day when I found the magazine. The developer was thrilled. There was talk of future collaborations, and several design firms in the city had reached out expressing interest in working with me. I flew back to Charleston feeling like I was walking on air. I had been away from my studio for nearly 2 weeks during the final installation phase, and I couldn't wait to get back to my own space, to start processing this incredible experience, to plan my next moves. Layla had flown back a few days earlier to handle some local client check-ins. When I texted her that I was back and heading to the studio, her response was strange. She just said, "Call me before you go in." But I was already pulling into the parking lot, my mind buzzing with ideas. And I didn't see her message until I was standing at my studio door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The energy of the space felt violated. My vintage armchair, the one I had found at an estate sale and spent countless hours reupholstering in a custom fabric I had designed myself, was positioned differently. The art books on my shelves were out of order. There was a faint smell of cheap perfume that definitely wasn't mine or Layla's. Little things were moved, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. But I knew every inch of this space intimately. Then Layla appeared from the back room, and the look on her face made my stomach drop. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying. She was holding her phone in one hand and a magazine in the other. She walked toward me slowly, and I could see her hands shaking. She didn't say anything, just held out the magazine. I took it. I'm not understanding yet what I was looking at. And then I saw it. Saw her. Bianca, on the cover of Southern Design and Architecture, one of the most prestigious design magazines in the region. And she wasn't just on the cover. She was in my studio. My studio. Standing there like she owned it. Like she had built it. Like every single thing in that photograph hadn't been created by my blood, sweat, and tears. The headline was a knife to my gut. Bianca Davies, the South's rising star in interior design. The subheading was even worse, from corporate burnout to creative breakthrough, how one woman found her true calling. I couldn't breathe. My vision was narrowing to a tunnel, and all I could see was that smug expression on Bianca's face. That knowing smile that said she had gotten away with something. That pose, so carefully calculated, with her hand on my grandmother's desk. The desk I had built from the barnwood. The desk that represented everything I had overcome. Layla's voice finally broke through. She was talking fast, her words tumbling over each other. She told me everything. How Eleanor and Bianca had shown up at the studio 3 weeks ago while I was in New York. How they had a photographer and a journalist with them. How Bianca had a key she must have copied when she was helping manage things. How they had moved furniture, rearranged my workspace, pulled out my client files and design books to use as props. How the photographer had spent hours getting the perfect shots, with Bianca posing as if this was her creative sanctuary. Layla had been there, had tried to stop them, but Eleanor had dismissed her, told her that this was a family matter and that she was being paid to assist, not to question. Richard had been there too, standing guard, making sure Layla didn't interfere. They had threatened to call the police if she touched anything, claiming that as Bianca's sister, I would obviously want to support her new career direction. They had made it sound like I was in on it, like this was some kind of family collaboration. The interview had been conducted right there in my studio, with Bianca spouting my design philosophy, my approach to sustainable materials, my beliefs about creating spaces that heal and inspire. She had used my words, my ideas, my process, and claimed them as her own creative epiphany. She had brought my design journals, the ones she had borrowed, and showed the journalist select pages, framing them as her own exploration of her newfound passion. Layla said she had tried to call me, but Eleanor had convinced her that I knew about it, that this was my way of helping my sister finally find her calling. It wasn't until after they left, after Layla looked at the photos on Bianca's Instagram that were already starting to go viral, that she realized what had actually happened. She had been trying to reach me for 3 days, but I had been in the final installation chaos. My phone mostly off, thinking everything back home was fine. I flipped through the magazine with shaking hands. Page after page of lies. Photos of Bianca's projects that were actually mine. Quotes about her design process that were lifted directly from interviews I had given to local blogs. Client testimonials that were clearly edited to replace my name with hers. There was even a section about her innovative approach to sustainable design, featuring photos of the reclaimed materials from my grandmother's barn. Materials that represented my last tangible connection to the one person in my family who had believed in me. My phone started ringing. Text messages flooded in. Emails dinged one after another. I looked at the screen, my heart sinking with each notification. Clients were congratulating me on my sister's success. Potential clients were asking if they should work with Bianca instead, since she was the breakout star. My biggest client, the Harrington family, whose southern estate I had been designing for the past 4 months, had sent an email with the subject line "Change of Plans." I opened it with dread pooling in my stomach. Dear Zoe, after seeing the feature in Southern Design and Architecture, we've decided to work directly with Bianca Davies moving forward. Her vision seems more aligned with what we're looking for. And frankly, her profile suggests she has more industry recognition. We'll be terminating our contract effective immediately. Best of luck in your future endeavors. I felt like I was going to throw up. 4 months of work. Thousands of dollars in time and materials I had invested up front. A project that was supposed to be my next big showcase. Gone. Just like that. Because my sister had stolen my identity and somehow made herself look like the more successful option, more messages kept coming. Design colleagues congratulating me on helping launch my sister's career. Friends confused about why Bianca was suddenly a designer. Random people asking if Bianca was taking new clients. And the Instagram notifications, hundreds of them, all because Bianca had tagged me in her post about the magazine feature. I clicked on it, my hands still shaking. The post was a masterclass in manipulation. A photo of her holding the magazine, with a long caption about how she had finally found the courage to pursue her creative dreams and how grateful she was to her talented sister Zoe for being such an inspiration. The comments were full of people praising her bravery, her talent, her aesthetic, praising her for things I had created. My work, my ideas, my years of struggle, all credited to Bianca's sudden creative awakening. I scrolled through her profile with growing horror. Her feed, which had been mostly corporate motivational quotes and occasional family photos, was now a carefully curated design portfolio. My portfolio. Projects I had worked on, photos of spaces I had created, design concepts I had developed, all posted as if they were hers. She had been doing this for months, slowly building a false narrative, waiting for the perfect moment to launch her grand deception. Some of the photos dated back even further. I saw images from my college days, projects from my student portfolio that she must have photographed when she visited me at school. She had been planning this for years. This wasn't a sudden impulse or a misguided attempt to reinvent herself. This was calculated. Methodical theft of my entire professional identity. Layla was standing next to me, and I could see tears streaming down her face. She kept apologizing, saying she should have done more, should have called the police, should have physically blocked them from entering the studio. But I knew this wasn't her fault. This was Eleanor and Richard and Bianca, my own family, using their power and privilege to steal from me while I was away, building the career they had spent years telling me was worthless. Before I could fully process what to do next, I heard the studio door open behind me. I turned around, and there they were, Eleanor and Richard, walking in like they owned the place, carrying coffee cups and wearing expressions of forced casualness that made my blood boil. Eleanor was smiling, that tight southern smile that meant she was about to say something awful while pretending to be sweet. Richard looked uncomfortable but determined, his lawyer face firmly in place. Eleanor spoke first, her voice dripping with false warmth. Zoe, darling, I'm so glad you're back. We wanted to talk to you about this wonderful opportunity. The response to Bianca's feature has been absolutely incredible. The phone has been ringing off the hook. Everyone wants to work with her. With both of you. Really? We think this could be a fantastic family partnership. I stared at her, unable to find words. A partnership. They had stolen my work, my studio, my identity. And now they wanted to call it a partnership. Richard cleared his throat. Now, Zoe, I know you might be feeling some type of way about how this all came together. But you need to look at the bigger picture. Bianca's profile is raising the visibility of design work in Charleston. That helps everyone, including you. And with her business background and your creative skills, you two could build something really substantial together. Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. And think about how proud we'd be. Both our daughters working together. It would be such a beautiful story. The Davies sisters. Taking the design world by storm. The door opened again, and Bianca walked in. She was dressed in designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her own. Her hair and makeup done professionally. Looking every bit the successful creative she was pretending to be. When she saw me, she had the audacity to smile and walk toward me with open arms. Like she was going to hug me. I stepped back. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Don't you dare touch me. Bianca's smile faltered for just a second before she rearranged her features into an expression of hurt confusion. Zoe, I know you're upset. But please, let me explain. This wasn't meant to hurt you. I was lost. Stuck in a career I hated. And then I started spending time with you, and I discovered this whole new world. Your passion was so inspiring. I found myself drawn to design, wanting to create beautiful things too. When the magazine reached out to feature an up-and-coming designer, Mom suggested they interview me. I thought you'd be happy for me, proud that I finally found something I loved. The gaslighting was so blatant, so expertly delivered, that I almost laughed. Almost. The magazine reached out to you really, and I suppose they just happened to want to do the shoot in my studio, with my things, showcasing my projects. Eleanor jumped in. Well, your studio is so photogenic, and you weren't using it at the time. We thought it made sense. And those projects. Bianca helped you with some of those. Didn't she provided input? Moral support. She deserves some credit. She deserves credit for filing paperwork and answering phones for 2 weeks. I said, my voice rising. She doesn't deserve credit for years of work that she had absolutely nothing to do with. Those projects are mine. Every single one. Every sketch. Every material choice. Every client relationship. Mine. Bianca's eyes started to water, and I recognized the manipulation tactic immediately. She had always been good at crying on command when she wanted sympathy from our parents. Zoe, you're being really hurtful right now. I thought we were finally bonding. Becoming real sisters. I thought you wanted to help me. You showed me everything. Invited me into your process. How was I supposed to know you'd react like this? Richard stepped forward, using his courtroom voice, the one that had intimidated countless witnesses. Zoe, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. What Bianca is saying makes sense. You brought her into your work. Shared your methods. There was an implied collaboration there. And frankly, getting angry about her success makes you look petty and jealous. Something inside me snapped. Years of being dismissed, minimized, and treated like I was less than Bianca, all while working twice as hard, suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. I walked over to my computer, pulled up my security system, and turned the monitor to face them. You want to talk about what actually happened? Let's talk about it. Because unlike you, I have evidence. I pulled up the security footage from 3 weeks ago, crystal clear video of Eleanor, Richard, and Bianca entering my studio with the photographer and journalist. Audio of Eleanor telling Layla to leave or be fired. Video of Bianca directing the photographer to shoot specific angles of my work, my space, my life. Audio of her practicing lines about her creative process and her design philosophy, using word-for-word quotes from interviews I had given months earlier. I played it all. Every damning second. The room went silent, except for the audio from the security system. Eleanor's face went pale. Richard's jaw tightened. But Bianca just stared at the screen with something that looked almost like resignation. Like she had always known this moment would come. When the footage ended, I turned to face them. I have everything documented. Every project in that magazine is mine. And I can prove it. Original sketches with dates stamped in my handwriting. Client contracts with my signature. Material receipts in my name. Emails from clients praising my work. Photo metadata showing that I took those pictures. I have professors from design school who will testify to my student work that you, I pointed at Bianca, have now claimed as your early exploration. I have vendors who have worked with me for years who have never even heard of you. I pulled out my design journals. The ones Bianca had borrowed and returned. I had already checked them when I first saw Layla's face. Several pages had been carefully photographed, and I could see the slight impression marks where they had been pressed against a scanner. You photographed my notes, my sketches, my entire process, and then you used them to build a fake portfolio. You didn't just steal my work. You tried to steal my entire identity. Eleanor found her voice first, but the false sweetness was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Zoe, darling, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. So what if Bianca got a little overzealous in representing herself? Family helps family. You should be supporting your sister, not threatening her. Think about what this kind of accusation would do to our family's reputation. Your reputation, I laughed. But there was no humor in it. That's what this is about. Not the fact that you helped your daughter commit fraud. Not the fact that you violated my trust and my property. But your reputation at the country club. Richard stepped forward, and now his voice had an edge of threat to it. Zoe, as an attorney, I'm advising you to think very carefully about what you do next. If you go public with these accusations, you'll be dragging the family name through the mud. Bianca could sue you for defamation. And do you really want to spend your time and money on a legal battle? Especially when you could just accept that this is a misunderstanding and move forward? The threat was clear. My own father, Alavier, was threatening to use his legal knowledge to protect Bianca and silence me. The man who had taught me to always tell the truth was now actively encouraging me to cover up a lie, but something had shifted inside me during those months in New York. I had proven to myself that I was good enough, talented enough, strong enough to succeed on my own merits. I had built something from nothing, against all odds. While being told I would fail, I had survived every dismissal, every criticism, every moment of doubt, and I was done sacrificing my truth to make them comfortable. Get out, I said quietly. Eleanor blinked. What? Get out of my studio. All of you. Right now. And Bianca, I want my key back. Bianca opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. Not one more word. Not one more lie. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. You don't get to steal from me and then play the victim. Give me the key and get out. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Richard's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Zoe. A big one. Don't come crying to us when this blows up in your face. The only mistake I made was trusting any of you. I replied. Now get out before I call the police for trespassing. Bianca finally showed some genuine emotion. Anger flashed across her face. The perfect victim mask, slipping. She threw the key on my desk with enough force that it skidded across the surface. Fine. You want to be petty. Be petty. But I'm not giving up the opportunities that have come from this. I worked hard too. Zoe. Maybe not in the same way. But I put in effort. You put in effort stealing. I said, that's not work. That's theft. And you're going to learn the difference. They left. Finally, Eleanor making one last attempt to appeal to my family loyalty. Richard warning me again about legal consequences. Bianca's tears returning as she played the wounded party. The door closed behind them, and I stood there in my violated studio. My sanctuary that no longer felt safe. Feeling both devastated and strangely empowered. Layla approached me cautiously. Zoe. What do we do now? I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. Now we fight back. Get me every piece of evidence we have. Every project file, every email, every contract, every photo, every receipt. I want a complete timeline of every piece of work I've done since I started this business. And then we're calling a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, the best intellectual property attorney in the state. Over the next week, Layla and I barely slept. We compiled a case file that was airtight. Every project in that magazine, I could prove was mine down to the original sketches with timestamps. The design philosophy Bianca had spouted in her interview, I had multiple recorded interviews and blog posts where I had articulated those exact same concepts months and years before. The sustainable materials approach, I had been pioneering that locally for years, had given talks about it, had built relationships with suppliers who would testify to our years of collaboration. I also reached out to my network, other designers, contractors, clients, professors, people who had seen my work, witnessed my process. I understood the depth of what I did. The response was overwhelming. Not only were they willing to help, many of them were furious on my behalf. Apparently, Bianca's feature had raised eyebrows in the design community. People who knew my work had been confused, had reached out to each other, asking if I had partnered with my sister, if this was some kind of collaborative effort. When they learned what had really happened, the solidarity was immediate and powerful. One person who reached out surprised me. Marcus Chen, a designer I had gone to school with. We had always been competitive, sometimes to the point of animosity. I had thought he might take some satisfaction in seeing me knocked down. But instead, his email was full of support. He wrote that Bianca had tried to connect with him months ago, asking detailed questions about his process and methods, and he had thought she was just a curious friend of mine. Now he realized she had been mining him for information too, probably planning to steal from him as well. He offered to testify, to provide whatever information would help my case. The attorney I hired was Martin Klein, a shark in the legal world when it came to protecting creative rights. He took one look at my evidence and literally rubbed his hands together. "This is the most clear-cut case of intellectual property theft I've seen in years," he said. "She didn't just cross the line, she obliterated it. And your parents' involvement as accessories, that's going to make this very interesting." Martin moved fast. Within 3 days, he had sent cease and desist letters to the magazine, to Bianca, and to my parents. The magazine's response was immediate and panicked. Their legal team reached out within hours, asking for a meeting. Apparently, the editor-in-chief was furious, both at being lied to and at the potential damage to the publication's reputation. They pulled the article from their website immediately and issued a retraction notice. But Bianca, encouraged by Eleanor and Richard, decided to double down. She posted on social media claiming I was jealous and trying to sabotage her new career. She played the victim beautifully, talking about sibling rivalry and how sad it was that I couldn't be happy for her success. For about 12 hours, it worked. People who didn't know the full story rallied around her, sent her messages of support, told her to ignore the haters. Then Martin Klein released a statement on my behalf, along with a carefully curated selection of evidence, side-by-side comparisons of my original sketches and the projects featured in Bianca's article, dates and timestamps proving that all the work predated her supposed creative awakening, testimonials from clients, colleagues, and professors, and most damning of all, carefully edited clips from my security footage showing exactly what had happened in my studio. The response was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, the narrative had completely flipped. Design blogs picked up the story. Social media exploded with outrage. Bianca's Instagram was flooded with comments calling her a fraud, a thief, a disgrace to the creative community. The magazine issued a full apology to me and announced they were investigating how such a fraudulent article had been published. Several of Bianca's new clients publicly canceled their contracts with her. Eleanor and Richard tried to do damage control. They called me, sent emails, even showed up at my studio again. This time I didn't let them in. I spoke to them through the locked door, my phone recording every word. They threatened legal action. They played the family card. They tried guilt, anger, manipulation. When nothing worked, Richard sent me a letter from his law firm, formally representing Bianca and warning me that any further defamatory statements would result in a lawsuit. Martin Klein's response was to file a lawsuit first. We sued Bianca for copyright infringement, fraud, and misrepresentation. We sued the magazine for negligence and defamation. And we named Eleanor and Richard as co-defendants for their role in facilitating the fraud. The lawsuit was detailed, damning, and public, The legal process was grueling. Depositions, court appearances, endless paperwork. Bianca's attorney tried everything. They claimed it was a sisterly misunderstanding. They argued that since we were family, there was an implied permission to share resources. They even tried to claim that I had given Bianca permission to use my work, that the security footage was taken out of context. But Martin Klein destroyed every argument. He brought in expert witnesses who testified to the uniqueness and originality of my work. He had my professors from design school confirm that the student projects Bianca had claimed were all mine. He presented the testimonies of clients who had worked exclusively with me, who had never even met Bianca. He showed the timeline of Bianca's social media posts, demonstrating the systematic theft of my portfolio over time. The most powerful moment came during Bianca's testimony. Under oath, confronted with irrefutable evidence, she began to crack. Martin Klein was relentless, walking her through each stolen project, each lie in the interview, each moment of deception. He played the security footage again in court, then asked her to explain how that represented a collaborative partnership. He showed her own Instagram posts, asked her to explain the dates, the captions, the blatant misrepresentations. Bianca tried to deflect, to blame Eleanor and Richard for pushing her, to claim she was just following their advice. But Martin kept circling back to the fundamental question: did you create this work? Did you design this space? Did you develop this concept? And every time, the answer was no. Eleanor and Richard's testimony was almost worse to watch. They tried to maintain their dignity, their social standing, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Under cross-examination, Eleanor admitted they had arranged the magazine feature, had contacted the journalist, had set up the photo shoot in my studio. Richard, the attorney, he was forced to admit that he knew what they were doing was legally questionable, but had convinced himself it was just family helping family. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day, I sat in that courtroom and watched my family try to justify their betrayal. Every day, I listened to them minimize my work, downplay their deception, and attempt to reframe their theft as some kind of misguided support. It was exhausting and heartbreaking and absolutely necessary. Judge Elias Thorne was a no-nonsense jurist, known for his fairness and his intolerance for deception. When he delivered his verdict, his words were scathing. He called Bianca's actions a calculated and malicious theft of intellectual property and noted that the involvement of her parents made it particularly egregious. He ruled in my favor on every count. The financial judgment was substantial. Bianca was ordered to pay me damages for lost business, emotional distress, and legal fees. The amount was significant enough that it would impact her for years. More importantly, Judge Thorne issued an injunction prohibiting Bianca from claiming credit for any of my work, from working in the interior design field under her own name for 5 years, and requiring her to issue public apologies on every platform where she had misrepresented herself. Eleanor and Richard were also held liable as co-conspirators. They were ordered to pay additional damages and court costs. Judge Thorne's comments about them were particularly harsh, noting that as a parent and as an attorney, Richard especially should have known better than to facilitate and encourage fraud. But the real punishment, the one that I knew would hurt them most, wasn't the money, it was the public humiliation. The trial had been covered extensively by local media, their friends, their country club circle, their professional networks. Everyone knew what they had done. The family reputation they had been so desperate to protect was destroyed, not by my accusations, but by their own actions being exposed in a court of law. After the verdict, I stood outside the courthouse with Martin Klein and Layla, facing a small crowd of reporters. Martin gave a brief statement about the importance of protecting creative rights and holding thieves accountable, regardless of their relationship to the victim. Then he stepped aside and let me speak. I kept it short. My name is Zoe Davies. I'm an interior designer. Everything I've built, I built through hard work, dedication, and a genuine love for creating beautiful spaces. What happened to me happens to creative professionals too often. Our work is stolen, our ideas are taken, and we're expected to stay quiet to keep the peace. I'm here to say that I'm done being quiet. I'm done prioritizing other people's comfort over my own dignity. And I hope my story helps other people find the courage to stand up for themselves too. The questions came fast after that, but I didn't answer them. I had said what I needed to say. I walked away from that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. The aftermath of the trial was both satisfying and surreal. The magazine that had featured Bianca ran a new article, this time about me, detailing the real story behind my work and apologizing for their role in the deception. Other publications reached out, wanting to interview me, wanting to feature my actual portfolio. Clients who had canceled returned, apologetic and embarrassed. New clients appeared, impressed by my willingness to fight for my work. Bianca's life, meanwhile, fell apart. The injunction meant she couldn't work in design, her dream career that had never really been hers anyway. Her social media was a wasteland of deleted posts and angry comments. She tried to get a corporate job again, but her reputation preceded her. Companies didn't want to hire someone who had been publicly exposed as a fraud and a thief. The last I heard through mutual acquaintances, she was working retail at a department store, barely making ends meet. Eleanor and Richard's social standing crumbled. Their country club friends, the people whose opinions they had valued above their own daughter's well-being, turned on them. Invitations stopped coming. Richard's law practice took a hit as clients questioned his ethics. Eleanor's charity boards quietly asked her to step down. They reached out to me a few times, always with some variation of, "Can we talk about putting this behind us?" But I never responded. There was nothing left to say. The person who surprised me most through all of this was Marcus. After the trial, he approached me with a proposal. He had been working on a project that was too big for him to handle alone, and he wanted to partner with me. Real partnership, he emphasized, with contracts and equal credit and complete transparency. I was hesitant at first, our competitive history making me wary, but Layla encouraged me to at least hear him out. That partnership turned into something I hadn't expected, a genuine friendship and a business collaboration that challenged both of us to grow. Marcus had connections in markets I hadn't broken into yet, and I brought a sustainable design approach that his clients loved. We opened a joint studio in Charleston, bigger and more modern than my old space, with room for both our individual projects and our collaborative work. But more than that, I rebuilt my sense of what family could mean. Layla, who had stood by me through everything, became like a sister to me. Marcus and his family welcomed me into their lives. I found a community of designers, artists, and creators who supported each other genuinely, who celebrated each other's successes without jealousy or competition. About 6 months after the trial, I decided to sell my old studio. It held too many bad memories, too many associations with betrayal and violation. I found a young designer just starting out, someone who reminded me of myself years ago, full of passion and determination but lacking resources. I sold it to her for half of what it was worth and threw in some of my furniture pieces and materials to help her get started. Her gratitude was overwhelming, and watching her excitement as she walked through the space that had once been my sanctuary helped heal something in me. The money from the lawsuit settlement, combined with the income from my thriving partnership with Marcus, allowed me to do something I had always dreamed of. I started a mentorship program for emerging designers, particularly those from backgrounds without family support or financial resources. I remembered how alone I had felt, how many times I had almost given up, because I didn't have anyone believing in me. I wanted to be for others what my grandmother had been for me, what my parents had refused to be. The program started small, just 3 mentees that first year, but word spread quickly. Young designers, particularly women and minorities who faced barriers in the industry, began applying. I taught them not just about design principles and business practices, but about protecting their work, establishing their value, and recognizing toxic relationships before they could do damage. I shared my story openly, not to dwell on the pain but to illuminate the path forward. One of my mentees, a brilliant young woman named Jasmine, came from a family situation similar to mine. Her parents had wanted her to be a doctor, had dismissed her creative aspirations, had made her feel like pursuing art was selfish. Watching her blossom under genuine encouragement, seeing her confidence grow as she realized her work had value, was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. When she landed her first major client, she called me crying, tears of joy, and I cried right along with her. The studio Marcus and I built together became something of a haven for creative professionals. We didn't just take on client projects, we hosted workshops, networking events, Portfolio reviews. We created a space where people could learn and grow and feel supported. The energy was completely different from my old studio, open and collaborative, rather than solitary and defensive. My work itself evolved, too. The experience with Bianca had made me more protective initially. But over time, I learned to channel those protective instincts in healthier ways. I developed better contracts, more explicit agreements about intellectual property rights. I became an advocate in the design community for stronger protections for creative professionals. I spoke at conferences about copyright issues, about the importance of documentation, about recognizing and addressing theft, but I also learned to be more open in different ways. I started a YouTube channel where I shared my process, my techniques, my philosophy. Some people warned me I was giving away trade secrets, but I realized that true creativity can't be stolen as easily as I had feared. Yes, Bianca had stolen my work, but she could never steal my mind, my vision, my ability to create new things. By sharing my knowledge, I wasn't making myself vulnerable. I was building a community and establishing myself as an expert in my field. The channel grew faster than I expected. Other designers started sharing their own stories of having work stolen, of dealing with toxic family dynamics, of struggling to establish themselves. The comment sections became support groups. People who had felt alone in their experiences found each other. And slowly, the conversation in the design world started shifting. Theft of creative work was no longer something to be hushed up and endured. It was something to be called out and fought against. About a year after the trial, I received a letter. Not an email. An actual handwritten letter, forwarded through my lawyer's office. It was from Bianca. The handwriting was shaky. The paper cheap. So different from the expensive stationery Eleanor had always insisted on for family correspondence. The letter was long, rambling, and I could tell she had rewritten it multiple times from the crossed-out sections and margin notes. She didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify what she had done. Instead, she wrote about her own realization process, about how the consequences of her actions had forced her to confront who she really was. She talked about starting therapy, about working minimum-wage jobs, and finally understanding what it meant to build something through actual effort. She wrote about the emptiness she had felt in her corporate career, the desperation that had driven her to try to take what I had built, and the shame she now felt about choosing theft over doing her own work. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask me to respond. She just wrote that she wanted me to know that she understood now, that she saw what she had taken from me, and that she was sorry. She ended the letter by saying that she was taking classes at a community college, not in design but in social work, trying to find something that was actually hers. I read the letter 3 times, sitting in my new studio with afternoon light, streaming through the windows. I felt no urge to respond. No desire to reopen communication. But I also didn't feel the burning anger that had consumed me for so long. I felt something closer to pity, mixed with a kind of distant hope that maybe she would find her own path eventually. I never wrote back. I put the letter in a folder with all the other documents from that time in my life and filed it away. Some people might call that cold. I might say that family deserves second chances, that forgiveness is necessary for healing. But I had learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I could release the anger, could hope that Bianca learned from her mistakes, without bringing her back into my life. Eleanor and Richard made one last attempt at contact about 18 months after the trial. They showed up at the new studio, unannounced, looking older and smaller than I remembered. They asked if we could talk, if there was any way to repair the relationship, if I would be willing to have dinner and discuss moving forward as a family. I met them at the door, but didn't invite them in. I listened to their prepared speech about how much time had passed, about the importance of family, about how we should all try to heal and move on. Eleanor even cried, probably genuinely for once, as she talked about how much she missed me, how empty their lives felt without me in them. When they finished, I said just one thing. I hope you learned something from all of this. I hope you understand now what you did. But understanding doesn't erase the past, and it doesn't obligate me to give you access to my future. I've built a good life, a life I'm proud of, with people who genuinely support me. I don't need what you're offering because I already have everything I need. Richard tried to interject, to argue. but I simply turned and walked back into the studio, closing the door behind me. Through the glass, I could see them standing there for a moment, lost and confused. Then they left, and I haven't heard from them since. My grandmother's desk, the one that had been in the photograph that started everything, sits in my private office now. I refinished it after the trial, sanded away the marks from years of use, and applied a new stain that brought out the grain of the wood. Sometimes I sit at it and think about her, about the faith she had in me, about how proud she would be to see what I built. Not just the business success, not just the awards and recognition, but the strength it took to stand up for myself, to refuse to accept crumbs of respect from people who should have given me unconditional support. The design industry has been good to me. My partnership with Marcus has opened doors I never imagined. We've worked on projects across the Southeast, created spaces that have been featured in national publications, won awards that once seemed like impossible dreams. But the work I'm most proud of is the mentorship program. Watching young designers find their voice, establish their worth, and create beautiful things with confidence and joy. That's the real legacy I want to build. I still design spaces that heal and inspire. That's always been my core philosophy. But now I also design my own life with the same intentionality. I choose who gets access to my time, my energy, my trust. I maintain boundaries that protect my peace. I surround myself with people who celebrate my success rather than trying to steal it. I've learned that sometimes the most radical act of self-love is simply refusing to accept less than you deserve. On my 32nd birthday, Marcus and Layla threw me a surprise party at the studio. They invited clients, mentees, friends from the design community, people who had supported me through everything. The walls were covered with photos of projects we had completed, of mentees who had launched their own careers, of moments of collaboration and creation. It was a celebration not just of another year of life, but of the entire journey that had brought me to this point. As I looked around the room at all these people who had chosen to be in my life, who had earned their place through genuine care and respect, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete and utter peace. The ghost of my old family. The weight of their betrayal. The pain of their rejection. All of it felt like it belonged to a different person in a different life. Someone asked me to make a speech, and I almost declined. But then I thought about all the young designers in the room, the ones still finding their footing, still learning to value themselves. So I stood up, glass of champagne in hand, and I spoke from the heart. I told them that success isn't just about talent or hard work, though both of those matter. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It's about building a life on your own terms, even when that means disappointing people who want you to be smaller. It's about choosing authenticity over approval, truth over peace, and self-respect over false harmony. I told them that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who are supposed to love you most. That betrayal from family cuts deeper than any other kind. But that pain, while devastating, can also be transformative. It can show you who you really are, what you're really capable of, and what you actually deserve. I told them that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, that protecting your work, your peace, and your boundaries isn't cruel, that you don't owe anyone access to your life just because they share your DNA or your history, and that sometimes the greatest act of love you can perform is loving yourself enough to walk away from people who refuse to see your value. The room was silent when I finished, and then the applause started. Not polite party applause, but the kind of recognition that comes from shared understanding, from people who had fought their own battles and understood what it cost to win. That night, after everyone had left and I was alone in the studio, I sat at my grandmother's desk and wrote in my design journal. Not about a project or a concept, but about the journey itself, about the girl who had spent so many years trying to prove her worth to people who would never acknowledge it, about the woman who had finally realized she didn't need their validation because she had her own, about the business owner, the mentor, the designer, the friend, the survivor who had built something real and lasting from the ashes of betrayal. Today, 3 years after that magazine cover shattered my world, I can honestly say I'm grateful for what happened. Not grateful for the pain, not grateful for the betrayal, but grateful for the clarity it brought. Grateful for the strength I discovered in myself. Grateful for the authentic relationships I've built since then. Grateful for the life I've created, that's entirely mine. My studio continues to thrive. The mentorship program has expanded to include designers from across the country. Marcus and I are opening a second location in Atlanta. I've been invited to speak at design conferences internationally. My work has been featured in publications I used to only dream about reading, let alone appearing in. But more than any professional achievement, I'm proud of the internal work I've done. I no longer need external validation to know I'm valuable. I no longer accept crumbs of affection from people who should offer whole meals. I no longer sacrifice my truth to keep others comfortable. I've learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of authentic alignment between who you are and how you live. The story of what happened with Bianca still circulates in design circles. Sometimes, young designers learn about it as a cautionary tale about protecting their work. But I want them to know it's more than that. It's a story about resilience, about self-worth, about refusing to be broken by the people who should have built you up. If I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would be this. Your worth is not determined by whether your family recognizes it. Your success is not diminished by others' refusal to acknowledge it. And sometimes the greatest gift life can give you is showing you exactly who people are, so you can make informed decisions about who deserves to be in your story. I don't know what Bianca's life looks like now. I don't know if Eleanor and Richard ever truly understood what they did, or if they just mourned the loss of the daughter they never really tried to know. I don't spend time wondering or hoping for their redemption. I've learned that closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes you have to give it to yourself by simply choosing to move forward without them. What I do know is this. I am Zoe Davies. I am an interior designer, a mentor, a business owner, and a survivor. I create spaces that reflect the truth that beauty can emerge from pain, that strength can grow from betrayal, and that the life you build for yourself is infinitely more valuable than the one others try to build for you. And every day, when I walk into my studio, when I work with my mentees, when I collaborate with Marcus, when I design spaces that will become homes and lives for others, I am living proof that you can take your power back. You can rebuild. You can thrive. And you can do it all on your own terms. Your value doesn't require anyone else's recognition to be real. Trust me. I learned that the hard way, but once you learn it, once you truly believe it, no one can ever take it from you again. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and honoring your truth? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved because they refused to see your worth? What did it cost you? And what did you gain? Drop your stories in the comments below. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear it. And hit that subscribe button because I'll be sharing more about building a life that's authentically yours. No matter who tries to stop you, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to be small. Remember that.